Hi Founders fans, my name is Jason, and today we're going to talk about the gerrymanderer himself, Elbridge Gerry. Now before we get started, I've heard arguments that the name is pronounced Gerry, Elbridge Gerry. I believe that is how it's supposed to be pronounced. I am very good at mispronouncing things from having read them in books for so long that I've made up my own mind on it. And since we call it gerrymandering instead of gerrymandering, I'm going to stick with Gerry. Please attack me in the comments for it. Anyway, let's talk about this wonderful person's life. So Elbridge Gerry was a wealthy man from Massachusetts. He was born into wealth. He had many vested interests around Massachusetts, and he was very against what the British were doing. So he signed up for the Revolution, and he was sent to the Second Continental Congress to represent Massachusetts. It just so happens there that this gentleman signed the Declaration of Independence. A few years later, he also signed the Articles of Confederation. So his founder cred is solid. Years go by, he goes back to Massachusetts, yada yada, and then they call the Constitutional Convention. Who does Massachusetts send to represent them there? Several people, one of which is Elbridge Gerry. So Gerry didn't love the idea of centralized power, and he was not happy with the outcome of the Constitutional Convention. In fact, he actually voted, he was one of only 3 men and the only man from the North who stayed for the entire duration of the convention, and at the end, when they all voted for the Constitution, Elbridge Gerry voted nay. Don't like it, boo. And he was one of only 3 men to be standing in the room when everyone else signed it. In hindsight, it was a mistake because he could have his name on that document also, but his main reason for not supporting the Constitution was that there was no Bill of Rights. He had other complaints too, but his idea was, hey, like, most of the states had bills of rights at this time. Like, why would this, if we're going to consolidate the government into a federal system, why does the big powerful government not have a Bill of Rights? So he went back to Massachusetts and really attacked. He became probably the most ardent anti-federalist in Massachusetts, if not the North. And he almost, I actually have the numbers right here. Massachusetts, their vote was 187 to 186 to ratify the Constitution. There was only 19 people out of 330 people, 19 of them. So he almost was able to stop the Constitution from happening because Massachusetts was so important to the 13 states. You know, Virginia was most important, but Massachusetts and Pennsylvania were a close second. So what happens after this? Gerry says, okay, you know what? If you can't beat him, join him. So he agreed to support the new government because he was outvoted, and in a republic, most of the founders agreed that if you were outvoted, you give up and you go with the flow. So Gerry was actually elected to the United States Senate. In the inaugural Senate, he was one of the original. I believe it was 20 because it was 22. He was one of the original 22 senators because when they started, Rhode Island and North Carolina were still sitting it out. Gerry's there for a few years. He does what he wanted to do, which was he was a real force for getting the Bill of Rights written and passed, which is really what he wanted to do there. Excuse me. He goes back home. A few years later, John Adams takes over as president, and he sends 3 delegates to France. There was the quasi-war was beginning, and Adams was trying to just keep the United States out of war. That's a different discussion about whether he was successful and whether he did the right things, blah, blah, blah. But what is important is that Gerry went with Charles Cotesworth Pinckney and John Marshall, who would just a few years later become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. These 3 men went to Europe and tried to negotiate with the French, who were in the midst of just coming out of the French Revolution. Just Napoleon was just taking over, and these Frenchmen said, sure, you want peace? give us some money, give us some money. And it became known as the XYZ affair because the three Frenchmen didn't use their names, they were just X, Y, and Z. And the Americans, including Gerry, said, well, we're just not going to be bribed, and went home. Gerry goes back home. A few years pass. He sits kind of quietly, although he was very against political parties at first. He mostly because as a man from Massachusetts, he was surrounded by Federalists, but he also associated with many of the Democratic Republicans, and that party basically grew out of the Anti-Federalists, of which we've discussed. Gerry was one of them. So he was very close with people on both sides of the aisle, and he stuck to local politics for a few years. Ran for governor of Massachusetts several times, unsuccessfully, until the last time, in 1810. He became governor of Massachusetts. He was there for 2 years, and it was while he was governor of Massachusetts that certain county and town borders were changed ever so gently to make things better for his party. Now, Gerry had nothing to do with this as far as we know. He seemed to be disgusted by it. This is not the kind of respectable politics that an honorable gentleman would pursue. Unfortunately, it was Democratic Republicans trying to help Democratic Republicans while he was a Democratic Republican governor of a Federalist state. So, when one of these borders ended up looking like a salamander, one of his opponents called it a gerrymander, and centuries later, we still use gerrymander as basically a scumbag political maneuver. Now, I will say, about a year after his term expires as governor, Gerry is actually recruited by James Madison to run as Vice President of the United States. And he did serve for about a year and a half as Vice President, 5th Vice President of the United States of America. Unfortunately, he did pass away while he was Vice President, but it was the end of a long and unbelievable, I don't know the right word, a long and irreplaceable career for an American founder. Like I said, Gerry went from signing the Declaration to fighting the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention to working as a foreign diplomat to governor of one of the most important states at the time to the second highest office in the nation he helped build. His role in the United States in the founding, I mean, I've only just scratched the surface in 8 minutes or so here. And in conclusion, it's unfortunate that a man like Elbridge Gerry is only known today for gerrymandering, but on the flip side, there are so many founders who are not known for anything that from my perspective, in a weird way, at least we still talk about him frequently, although indirectly. So my name is Jason. If you enjoyed this, please like, and if you're new here, hit subscribe so you can see more videos. We can chit-chat about the American Revolution and the founding fathers, founding parents of the United States. Thank you, and you have a great afternoon.